As educators, I'm sure that we share a belief that all students deserve the best opportunities to learn and that they should feel included in the classroom. There's been a lot of work done to encourage women into engineering and science, as well as providing accommodations for students with learning differences and disability. Each day, lecturers go the extra mile to learn more about the cultures of our diverse student body. And our day-to-day teaching includes the managing of a classroom environment so that everyone is treated with respect in that space. However, one area that needs to be addressed a little bit more is creating a learning environment which enhances the sense of belonging of our LGBTQ students. In 2017, Dr. Nikki Ward and Dr. Nicola Gale from the University of Birmingham published a best practice guide for LGBTQ inclusivity in higher education, which has almost gone worldwide since then. The guide contains a framework which supports lecturers to feel more confident in their teaching practice in making gender and sexual diversity visible in the curriculum, or as I want to say, queering the curriculum. Furthermore, the framework or model proposed by Nikki and Nicola can be used by individual teaching staff, programme teams, and even the whole organisation to evaluate what is happening right now. It can then be used to scope out ways to become more inclusive of our LGBTQ students. The guide also contains very useful examples of how to queer the curriculum in areas such as arts, humanities, law, social sciences, and STEM. The focus of this presentation is on how the framework can be used for making curriculum more inclusive. This slide gives you an overview of what I'm going to cover in the presentation. Introducing you to the framework, which is composed of 3 domains: language, role models, and curriculum, which can be applied at any or all of 3 levels, increasing in action, complexity, and transformation. Throughout the presentation, you'll hear from Dr. Nikki Ward, who I had the pleasure of interviewing shortly before her retirement from the University of Birmingham last year. So we'll start first of all with the 3 domains. Beginning with the language domain. Students pick up on the language lecturers use in the classroom, and they use language to assess the safety of various people they meet. In one Irish study, students were frustrated that their literature lecturer went out of their way to avoid saying that the 2 characters in a play were homosexual or gay, and constantly referred to the 2 people as being good friends. In the quotation, you can see the effect of a classroom scenario which implied in a no-fuss way that relationships can differ to what is considered normal. And you can see the positive impact that made on an LGB student. 10 years ago, we didn't use the term selfie, now it's in everyday use. And yet some of us are worried about remembering gender terminology like the new or neo pronouns and using the right pronouns with students who have declared their personal pronouns. And yet this can be one of the easiest places to begin on the framework. For example, welcoming students to use their pronouns if they wish, and not correcting grammar when the pronoun they is used as a singular pronoun in an assignment.
And I think the other thing is that it's really important to acknowledge to students that you're not an expert, and certainly that's the feedback we were getting from students, that they don't expect us to get it right all of the time. They want us to be open to having that conversation with them in a sensitive way and not in a demeaning way.
The second domain is role models, and these may include lecturers who are visibly out, who may be also perceived as a safe person to talk to if the student experiences problems. However, irrespective of whether lecturers are straight or queer or in or out,
They may not necessarily want to be visible role models for all kinds of reasons, personal and otherwise. Nonetheless, the queer lens can be put on the role models commonly referred to in class. For example, the theorists, the scientists we use in maths, the business leaders, the authors, historians, practitioners, researchers, and so on. And when role models mentioned in class are stereotypically heterosexual, or the content contains stereotypical images. For instance, the images of engineers, they're always men. This does not add to the sense of belonging of LGBTQ students, not to mention women who we want to attract into STEM careers. And with a little bit of research, LGBTQ role models can be added into the reference materials, discussions, web links, and so on. Two of the most commonly referred to role models or maths heroes for LGBTQ students are Alan Turing and Ada Lovelace, whose images are shown here. Here is a screenshot taken from the website 500 Queer Scientists, which contains the biographies of 500 and more queer scientists and students from all around the world who identify with different genders, sexual orientations, ages, shapes and sizes, with and without disability. All have a passion for science and mathematics and want to share that passion with others, including disadvantaged groups. Some are students, some are researchers, some are starting out in their careers, some have retired. Some of the bios mention how they overcame isolation because they're the only gay or transgender person in the classroom or even in their own community. And some bios speak about positive role models in their universities who mentored or allied with them. There are a lot of similar websites covering other domains such as business, law, and social science. The 500 QS site can be filtered for different countries, and at the time of writing, there were only 4 Irish queer scientists on the site. And hopefully we'll see more Irish people on the site very soon who will be shining examples to our LGBTQ students for careers in science and mathematics, enabling them to see what is possible. So Maureen O'Connor is a gay technologist at UCC, and Andrew Mooney is a conservation scientist from Trinity. One can imagine the positive effect having a link to such a site would be for LGBTQ students who can see that there are positive role models who they can identify with and who are succeeding in their field. An even more positive change arises when the lecturer, who's not used to talking about LGBTQ identities, makes the leap and builds in an LGBTQ discussion topic relevant to their area of study. The third domain of the framework is curriculum content. And the next time you're designing a new curriculum, it's an ideal time to apply the Gail Ward framework from the beginning to build in inclusion for the diverse group of students you may be working with. And maybe the vision for the curriculum can include collaboration with potential students who represent the diversity that is likely to occur in the classroom. And seeking to ensure that they feel included in the topics, the content, the activities and the assignments from the outset. The Birmingham guidance document suggests discussion topics in relation to how diversity may impact on the ethics and design of research and data collection instruments, particularly in relation to how people self-identify, which might not be covered in the traditional manner. Also consider building in opportunities to discuss power inequalities, privilege, agency, culture and careers within the class topics, activities and assignments. Even with an existing curriculum, the Gail Award framework can be applied to modifying the course materials and content and activities and the way you teach it to become more inclusive and to encourage a learning environment where all diversity is valued.
We did try to take a very broad view of the curriculum, so not just to think about the curriculum in terms of what you do in a lecture, but also looking at things like programme handbooks, making sure it's integrated into there, thinking about what's on your website when you're recruiting students, how to play out in those things when you're during induction and when you're welcoming students to the institution, how is it featured? So it is important, I think, to think quite broadly and not just to put the responsibility on individual lecturers.
I was in the library for the last couple of weeks looking at our mathematics books, and the erasure of women in particular, particularly when you're looking at STEM and trying to encourage women into STEM. Yeah. And I'm saying, if we're erasing women from the books, how can we make our LGBTQ students visible?
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely the conversation we were having. And you talk about sort of books, and sometimes the easier steps, I'm not saying they're completely straightforward, you have to do a bit of searching probably, but the easier steps are to start and look at things like reading lists, for example. Do your reading lists reflect sort of a diversity of the population?
So each of the domains can operate at the following 3 levels. Number 1, increasing awareness. Number 2, additive approaches. And 3, transformative practices. At the awareness level, one could start with simply reflecting on where one is right now in relation to one's knowledge and understanding of diversity and inclusion, in relation to LGBTQ students and their issues. There are many practical steps which can help increase one's awareness, such as undertaking some CPD, or extra readings, or engaging in conversations, or joining an online forum, or even watching documentaries. Why not learn more about the services and supports for LGBTQ students on campus, and be able to signpost them to these services, as well as other LGBTQ activities on campus, such as Pride activities, LGBTQ History Month, and so on. Awareness extends to recognising that students are not homogenous, and on the other hand, when we have someone who comes in who we perceive as different, particularly LGBTQ, and we treat them other than the norm, that this can also bring about its own problems. And the second level is the additive approach, and educators might introduce books, texts, movies, multimedia elements, as well as individual and group projects, and again doing this without altering the curriculum's basic structure, purposes and characteristics. For example, you might consider including discussion about LGBTQ scientists and mathematicians in an existing learning unit or lecture or topic on stats. And sometimes lecturers do this to coincide with LGBTQ events, anniversaries of an LGBTQ scientist, but it can be done without fuss at other points in the year. Another example is substituting a different data set in a lecture or an assignment to the one you normally use, such as one from a gender identity survey or data covering queer experience in STEM. You can see an example of a survey on the left. It's also a good idea to be prepared for the discussion that may arise.
Thinking about things like assignments that you set for students. So I remember one conversation with a colleague who was a mathematician who was sort of saying, well, when you're setting statistics assignments, it's really difficult because statistics are statistics. What you want back from people is a list of equations. Or I'm not a mathematician, as I'm sure you can tell from the way I talk about it. So it is difficult. But even if just one of their assignments is around looking at the sort of statistics around LGBTQ suicide, for example, you've just mentioned. So thinking about how assignments can speak to some of those issues as well, that is sometimes that's the start of it, that's their sort of easy wins, I think, often, is to start with those things and then build on that as you build your own confidence.
And now we're at the highest level in the framework, and this is going to take a little bit more effort and research. And it's called transformative practices. And some of these ideas you might be familiar with already. For instance, encouraging learning by means of discovery, encouraging students to carry out self-evaluation and self-governance, cooperative learning, students working together in teams, especially if the teams can be constructed to reflect the diversity in the classroom, the use of discussion, the development of the diversity of viewpoints. Another example of transformative practice is supporting students to act as empowered individuals. At this level, we may be ceding control to the students who decide and act on projects that are important to them. For example, your LGBTQ students might request that an assignment is amended to explore LGBTQ identities, as well as other group identities in relation to a social issue. And it might also involve supporting students to take action on a social issue arising out of their academic work, who want to go the extra step and drive change in the university in relation to their findings. This really combines theory with practice and may require identifying people, internal organisations and other organisations and resources that might support the educator as well as their students, and also the concerns and challenges that might lead students towards social action through being on that module. Transformative practices alter the structure of the curriculum to encourage students to view concepts, issues, events and themes from multiple perspectives. Integrating such practice into the curriculum may require a little bit more effort, but taking a step-by-step approach and considering the life cycle of the module, one can apply transformation to a module building block, such as one learning unit, or one presentation, or one assignment, and so on, as opposed to tackling the curriculum all in the one go. The framework developed by Nikki and Nicola is represented in the following table, and it maps the domains against the levels and gives examples at each intersection for you to consider. Don't be scared off at this stage and think that you have to fill every box. This is about widening participation, and small changes can have a big impact. So going through the example, starting with applying each of the levels to the language domain. When we map increasing awareness against language, the intention is to avoid the use of abusive and discriminatory language. Attending CPD in this area might be a useful step. Staying with the language domain, the additive approach might include making an effort to avoid heteronormative and cisnormative language in oral and written communication. These terms might not be familiar to you right now, and there'll be more on this later on. The additive approach requires more action to make visible gender and sexual diversity in the curriculum. A maths lecturer might take steps to replace he, she pronouns with the more neutral they and their. At the highest level of the language domain, one might engage in more self-development work to be able to critically engage with queer and trans-inclusive language. When we map the second domain, role models, against increasing awareness, it could take the form of signposting the students to LGBTQ organisations and events. For example, letting all the students know that there are great maths activities going on STEM LGBTQ Day. It could also mean learning more about the supports that are available internally and externally and signposting the students to these resources. At the transformative level, lecturers themselves who are trained to be allies can have a huge impact on classroom inclusion. Now we're mapping curriculum content against each of the levels, starting with increasing awareness. And again, this is a fairly low level of activity, but it still has an impact on inclusion, because if it changes your mindset, increasing awareness changes your mindset. How good is that? So we're starting with a basic knowledge of gender and sexual diversity, acknowledging that these things need to be made visible. And moving on then to applying curriculum content to the additive approach, now we can see we're adding in topics, themes and readings about LGBTQ identities, finding out who the maths heroes are, who are LGBTQ, and so on, and going to the very highest level of activity, effort and change in the curriculum. We're talking about mapping the curriculum against transformative practice, and I've described transformative practice in detail in a previous slide, and see about bringing these approaches to pedagogy into your curriculum. Ceding control to your students, allowing your students to come up with the activities that are meaningful to them, and which include equality, diversity and inclusion.
I've been doing a lot of research, and every time I put your names into the search engine, I'll come across somebody else who's using your framework, and I come across a lovely example. I think it came from Scotland, and they had absorbed your framework into this workshop, and they were kind of using it as a where are we now and where are we going.
And that's what we did. I mean, when we were able to do things face to face, we had a copy of the model essentially just drawn onto big pieces of flip chart paper. And then we gave people post-it notes so that they could write on, this is what I'm doing now, and they could stick it on where they thought they were on the grid. And then a different coloured post-it note for, well, what could I do to sort of move it along, sort of a pledge to what I'm going to do next. It does work quite well as a sort of continuum for people to see how they might develop.
So using the Birmingham suggestions and a stack of post-its, I'm starting with a blank template of the framework, which allows you to structure and document your approach. Why not start with one of your modules? What you might find after doing one module is how transferable a lot of the ideas are to other modules you teach. This template is available as a Word document and also as an Excel file. And a good place to start with the framework is to evaluate where you are right now for a particular module you're teaching. And what if you think that you know absolutely nothing about LGBTQ issues? Then the only way is up, if you're motivated to do something about queering your curriculum. And the best place to start is at the beginning by increasing your awareness about LGBTQ issues and asking yourself, how inclusive is your curriculum right now? And maybe you can see some quick wins, which take very little effort, which might address the weaknesses in your curriculum. And there might be some things which need a little bit more effort and have to be planned out and tackled over time. And I've said already, taking stock is very important. And here's an example from one lecturer who recognised that they had a lot of stereotypical content in their curriculum, in their notes and images and so on, and that they had fallen into the old white dude role. And they also recognised that they were using he and she pronouns a lot, and that they had fairly traditional representations of families in their stats notes.
Good idea to not let the grass grow under your feet and formulate an action plan and decide where you will start. If you have examples of good practice, why not share them with other staff as well? So the question, what can I do next? Well, there are so many things you can do, and even taking one small step can bring an amazing impact on developing inclusion. The thing is to take some action. Previously, you heard me mention some terms you might not be familiar with. And why not take this as a first step and find out more about them yourself? For instance, define the following: normative, heteronormative, cisgender, cisnormative. Follow this up by distinguishing normal from normative and give examples under each heading. To assist you in your journey, I will be providing, under each domain and each level, a number of resources which you're free to use in any way you wish. These will include text files, presentations, worksheet templates, assignments, and so on. The worksheet templates are available for guiding you through the levels of the framework and for capturing resources which you might find or are shared with you. And these templates also often contain useful links. There are also some maths assignments which cover the additive approaches and transformative practices. It is hoped to grow more and more resources over time, and if you have a resource you wish to share, which could be a good practice, something you have modified as a result of engaging with this learning unit, or something you've created, it might be a screenshot, a notepad on a class discussion, or a good website, a book you've come across, or a course you have attended.